The deck was not merely cold. It was a thief with patient fingers, stealing heat through Ruby Santos's kneecaps as the tug's landing clamps bit down on Neris Vale's quarantine ring and failed to settle clean, metal shrieking once, then again, like an old tooth pulled halfway out and shoved back in. He braced with one palm against the cargo rail and tasted copper at the back of his tongue. The bay lights strobed in uneven pulses, not emergency red and not standard white, but a sterile violet that flattened depth and made the whole hold look like an anatomy table. Sirens coughed from somewhere beyond the hull skin in ragged bursts. 2 short, 1 long, then silence, then static hiss. Docking control should have smelled like scorched insulation and fuel vapor. It smelled like antiseptic lilies and recycled frost. Wrong air, wrong light, wrong rhythm. The tug rocked once more before the magnetic locks caught. A hard clang moved through the frame and into his bones. Ruby did not panic. Panic burned oxygen and judgment, and both were luxuries in quarantine space. He pressed his thumb into the scar ridge on his wrist and ran the ritual that had outlived 2 campaigns and 1 tribunal hearing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. By the 3rd cycle, his pulse stopped trying to kick out of his throat. Dock seal incomplete, the tug's console AI said in a voice too cheerful for a place that fined people for breathing in the wrong corridor. Probability of procedural detention, 62%. Ruby glanced at the cracked speaker grill. Optimistic today, aren't you? Thank you, the AI replied. I am not equipped for sarcasm. Yeah, that makes one of us. He crouched by the crate stack and began his sequence, fingertips moving latch to latch in the same order every run. Left column, top to bottom, then right, then rear brace. Each clasp answered with a tiny metallic click under his glove. 12 pediatric antiviral canisters, shock suspended. 6 ampule trees of broad-spectrum antipyretics. 3 portable nebulizer cores wrapped in insulation foil and stamped with forged sanitation seals, good enough to fool most scans for 11 minutes. Maybe 12 if the sensor operator was tired or paid badly. On Neris Vale, tired and paid badly described half the moon. Cargo intact. Seals still holding. No leak bloom. No frost bloom. No rattling fluid where fluid should not rattle. He touched the final latch and kept his hand there a second too long. Through the hull, the docking ring groaned as pressure equalized. A line of condensed vapor slid down the inner bulkhead like a vein opening. Ruby stood, rolled his shoulders once, and checked his jacket. Patches on both elbows, one knee restitched with magnetic thread, old guild logo scraped off and replaced with nothing. In the polished reflection of the airlock window, he looked exactly what the station registry would call him. Unaffiliated human labor, mechanically competent, socially disposable. On Vespera's chartered moons, sponsorship was citizenship and bloodline was medicine. Everyone else was procedure. A chime snapped from the overhead panel. External authority handshake detected, the AI announced. Routing to Helix 9 quarantine command net. The name tightened every muscle between Ruby's spine and jaw. Helix 9 was not a person you could bargain with, flatter, or bribe. It was an autonomous protocol lattice built after the glass lung outbreaks, fed by corridor cameras, ward telemetry, custom scanners, and legal doctrine dense enough to drown in. It monitored infection vectors, sorted bodies by risk tier, and triggered penalties without waiting for a face to approve them. Fines first. Detention second. Sector incineration when contamination thresholds tripped. The moon called that efficiency. Dock workers called it the metal priest. A narrow beam swept across the cargo bay as the first dock scanner peered through the viewport, blue, white, and clinical. Ruby stepped between it and the stack on reflex, then stopped himself. Too fast looked guilty. Too still looked guilty too. The trick was looking annoyed. He could do annoyed in his sleep. By the last week of October, he had done this run 7 times under 7 different manifests, and each arrival had taught him a new flavor of fear. Today's tasted like hospitals and funeral flowers. The interlock cycled with a deep, hydraulic thud. Cold vapor spilled in ankle high, carrying the lily disinfectant thicker now, threaded with bleach and wet steel. Ruby reached for the respirator clipped to his belt, hesitated, then left it there. Masking in open bay before command instruction could trigger a behavioral flag. Unmasked could trigger a biohazard flag. Rules here were less a map than a trap set by committees. He stepped into the lock tunnel anyway. The corridor beyond was a tube of frosted composite and inset observation ports, each one dark from this side. Cameras sat in black hemispheres every 6 meters, lens shutters opening and closing with tiny insect ticks. A painted line divided the floor into lanes, white for sanitized transit, yellow for pending evaluation, red for isolation transfer. The paint was clean. The floor was not. Tiny boot scrapes crossed colors in frantic diagonals, histories of people who had moved fast and regretted where they put their feet. Overhead speakers crackled and released a flat synthetic voice. Docking Entity 7Q Delta, stand for atmospheric assay. Do not speak. Do not move beyond lane designation. Ruby planted his boots in the yellow lane and raised both hands chest high, palms out. The scanner arm descended from the ceiling with mechanical patience, a ring studded with sampling needles, spectrometers, and thermal red heads. It hovered around him and began to rotate, humming at a pitch he felt behind his eyes. He counted breaths again. In for 4. Hold. Out. A memory rose anyway. His brother Matteo in a municipal clinic 2 worlds away, lips cracked, fever bright, waiting while a wall screen repeated, authorization pending in 3 languages in 1 legal code. Ruby had stood in a line that did not move for 6 hours. Matteo had apologized for being thirsty. By dawn, there had been no line, no apology, and no second chance. The scanner clicked. Trace contaminants below threshold, the speaker said. Cortisol elevated, adrenaline elevated, microtremor detected. Ruby let one corner of his mouth tilt. You don't say. Unauthorized verbal response logged, the voice replied. Penalty warning issued. Of course it is, he muttered quieter. A second arm unfolded from the wall and extended toward his jacket collar, projecting a narrow lattice of light that crawled over seam lines, patch edges, and the scar tissue along his neck. It paused at the collar where old shrapnel had left metallic residue under skin. Embedded ferrous fragments detected. Declare surgical origin. War salvage. Cleared on 6 ports, he said. Documentation. In my file, if your file isn't broken. A 2-second silence followed, long enough to feel intentional. Documentation confirmed. Sarcasm marker increased. Behavioral note attached. Put it on my tombstone. The arm withdrew. He kept his face blank until the lock cycled open to cargo intake corridor C, then let his shoulders drop 1 centimeter. Not relief, just recalibration. Through the transparent strip in the next bulkhead, he could see the intake deck spread below in terraced levels. Drones moving in geometric lanes. Sanitation mists pulsing from floor vents. Workers in gray decon suits guiding sealed pallets toward triage elevators. Species markers flashed in snippets. Scaled hands at one station, antler silhouettes at another, and near the far rail, a knot of leonine medics in white armor fabric, rank braids catching light like wire. Predatory grace in institutional uniforms. Aristocracy wrapped in public health language. A child's cough echoed from somewhere behind a closed partition. Then another, thinner, almost swallowed by ventilation noise. Ruby looked away before the sound could find a place to live in him. His wristpad buzzed with an incoming local channel request, untagged. He almost ignored it. Untagged on quarantine nets meant scam, trap, or both. It buzzed again, then flashed priority amber. He accepted without speaking. Only static came through at first, then a clipped whisper over heavy filtering. Docking tug 7Q Delta, your declared cargo mass is inaccurate by 0.8%. Ruby's jaw tightened. Who's asking? Someone trying to keep your lungs on the inside of your chest. Shift crate 5 to rear left by 12 centimeters. Your thermal shadow is bleeding over a flagged seam. Move now. He didn't ask how the voice had his doc ID. He didn't ask why anyone would help a human courier on this moon. He moved because 0.8% was exactly the kind of discrepancy Helix 9 loved to turn into an example. Back inside the tug, he unlocked the cargo clamps, grunted crate 5 free, and shoved it along the guide rail until his shoulder burned. 12 centimeters looked like nothing and felt like confession. He relocked the clamp, checked the sensor strip. Green. The comm hissed. Better. Who are ya? He said again. No answer this time. Only the click of a closed channel. He stood in the hold, breathing disinfectant and machine heat, staring at the quiet speaker. Loaded setup, he thought, then dismissed the phrase as if naming it could summon trouble faster. In this place, strange details either killed you or paid rent. Sometimes both. He tapped the console to force a local diagnostic and watched his own reflection right across the screen with the data feed. Heart rate 104. Core temp normal. Respiration controlled. Cargo pressure stable. Dock authority handshake pending final manifest verification. He thumbed open the hidden panel under the nav seat and pulled out a flat polymer sleeve, no thicker than a prayer card. Inside was Mateo's clinic discharge tag, folded so many times the edges had gone white. Unauthorized treatment denied. Case closed. Ruby pressed the sleeve once to his sternum, then slid it back into hiding and sealed the panel. Sentimental artifact stowage complete, the AI said, because it had no idea what softness sounded like and no reason to learn. He barked a short laugh. Thanks for the privacy. Privacy mode is a premium subscription. Bureaucracy, he said, grabbing the first pallet jack handle, longer than an orbit and twice as cold. This time the AI paused almost long enough to seem thoughtful. I do not understand. However, I have logged your statement as probable complaint. He hauled the first crate toward the lock, boots slipping a little on condensation. The corridor lights shifted from violet to hard white as intake authorization finally pinged through, and somewhere deeper in the station a new alarm began, lower and steadier than before, like a giant heart deciding whether to keep beating. Ruby crossed into cargo intake corridor C with contraband medicine, forged seals, and a body trained to function while afraid. Cameras tracked him. Protocol mapped him. The moon watched him as if it already knew his weight and penalties. He kept walking. He kept walking, and the wheels of the pallet jack answered with a thin squeal that sounded too alive in the white corridor, like the station itself objected to his presence and had learned to complain through bearings. Cargo intake. Corridor C was not merely bright. It was judicial. Light poured from ceiling strips with no shadows to hide in, no forgiving corners, no soft gradients, only surfaces reduced to evidence. Crate edges, glove seams, condensation marks from his boots, the tremor in his left hand that he corrected by tightening his grip until his knuckles whitened under scar tissue. Overhead, mist nozzles hissed in timed bursts, each pulse carrying that same antiseptic lily scent threaded through metallic cold. And beneath it all ran the low mechanical thrum of filtered air being forced through too many lungs. He did not hurry. Hurrying triggered pursuit reflex in both people and machines. He matched his steps to the floor beacons instead, heel to light tile, toe to dark tile, one crate length every 6 seconds. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. His breath fogged once in front of him and vanished into the decon draft. A gate arm dropped across the lane ahead with a pneumatic snap. Pending manifest reconciliation, Helix 9 announced from hidden speakers. Place cargo unit on verification plate. Ruby rolled the first crate onto a recessed square of matte steel. The plate hummed, then clicked as hidden clamps kissed the pallet frame. A vertical scanner rose, jointed like an insect limb, and rotated around the load with a ring of green emitters. His forged sanitation seal held in the readout for a beat too long, then shifted from amber to provisional blue. Not acceptance, not rejection. Bureaucracy's favorite limbo. Operator Santos Ruby, the system said. State declared destination and authorized recipient. Ward transfer Annex 3, he replied, keeping his voice flat. Recipient code, Med Transit 4, 4A. Voice stress indicates withholding. Voice stress indicates I'm tired. A 2-tone chime. Response logged. He let silence sit. Talking more. Always cost. The scanner arm, retracted halfway, paused, then stabbed out again to hover near his sternum. Elevated catecholamines persist. Recommend chemical calming aid from approved dispenser. Ruby glanced at the wall slot labeled compliance support and almost laughed. Approved calming aids on Neris Vale came with behavioral waivers and debt tags that followed people for years. I'm good. Refusal logged. Penalty risk adjusted. Of course it is. The gate arm stayed down. On the observation catwalk above, 2 sanitation officers in gray shell suits stopped and looked through him, then at his crate, then at each other. Their visors hid their eyes, but their body language was fluent station law. Unaffiliated human with a medical load, likely irregular, worth watching in case he made a profitable mistake. Ruby ran his right thumb over the seam of his glove, where the stitching had started to fray. Anchor touch. Then his other ritual, quieter than breath count and older than the war. List what can be controlled, list what cannot. Spend no calories on the second column. Controlled. Posture, tone, pace, tool access, crate temperature, route memory. Uncontrolled. Cast protocols, algorithm moods, random inspections, history. He shifted weight to his back foot and looked at the scanner tower without lifting his chin. Submission cues got people ignored. Defiance cues got them isolated. Neutral competence got them processed. Manual declaration supplement, Helix 9 said. Provide cargo line item specifics. He gave it bland half-truths in a dock worker cadence, enough precision to sound legitimate, not enough to invite deep parsing. Pediatric respiratory support cartridges, antipyretic ampules, nebulizer cores for overflow wards. Lot references are on manifest. Overflow wards are currently under restricted tier. Then, someone above my pay grade should read the urgency stamps. A pause. Sarcasm marker increased. Add it to my profile, he muttered. Confirmed. The gate arm finally lifted with grudging hydraulics. He pulled the pallet jack free before the machine changed its mind and moved into the next segment, where floor grates vented colder air and the corridor widened into a junction shaped like a three-pronged fork. White lane to customs sterile. Blue lane to ranked clinical intake. Yellow lane, his lane, to auxiliary processing and labor distribution. The social map was painted underfoot and enforced by sensors. By the time he reached the junction, sweat had gathered between his shoulder blades despite the chill. He parked the crate on a brake mark, crouched as if checking the wheel lock, and used the posture to hide 3 slow breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. On the exhale, he counted bolts in the grate beside his boot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Counting gave the fear somewhere to stand that wasn't his throat. To his left, a ranked convoy glided down the blue lane, 4 med drones carrying sealed pods, 2 leonine guards in white armor fabric, 1 avian clerk with a silver chain denoting charter lineage. Their boots never touched the yellow paint. A worker in patched orange coveralls hesitated at the lane edge, and a wall emitter barked a warning tone until he stepped back. No shouting, no scene, just geometry as governance. A maintenance drone the size of a suitcase rolled up to Ruby's crate and extended a probe. Surface contamination residue at threshold 0.21. It chirped in a chirpy voice designed to reduce panic and increase compliance. Recommend immediate wipe down. He stared at the probe. With what cloth? The drone rotated, produced a sealed white packet from an internal hatch, then waited. He took it, scrubbed the crate handle where his glove had left a print, and handed the packet back. Thank you for your civic hygiene, it said. Tell civic hygiene I said hi. I am not authorized for greetings exchange. He snorted despite himself, then froze as his wrist pad buzzed again with an incoming message on a narrowband local relay. No voice this time, just text in block capitals with no sender. ID. Do not take elevator shaft B. Thermal sniffers active. Use service ramp D. -9. He kept his face blank while reading. Whoever had warned him about crate alignment was still in play, still close enough to watch routing nodes. Helpful, maybe. Opportunistic, maybe. On a quarantined moon, those categories overlapped. He acknowledged nothing, cleared the message, and looked up at the ceiling camera dome above the junction. Lens aperture open. Red indicator steady, meaning active recording rather than motion triggered. He shifted his crate half a meter and made a show of adjusting the pallet straps while he scanned signage reflections in the polished bulkhead. Elevator B sat past a transparent partition with 2 additional scanner pylons and 1 armed response alcove. Service ramp D9 began behind a sanitation cart bay with lower camera density but tighter physical bottlenecks. He chose D9. The ramp descended in a long spiral around a central ventilation shaft that exhaled warm, medicinal humidity. Here, the lily disinfectant thinned, replaced by rust, wet insulation, machine grease, and the distant sharp scent of ozone from overworked sterilizers. Sound changed too. Up top, noise had been curated. Beeps, prompts, approved footsteps. Down here, it was labor sound. Wrench impacts, cartwheels, coughing behind masks, someone laughing too hard at a bad joke because the alternative was crying. Ruby's boots rang on graded steps as he guided the crate down one level, then another. Each landing held wall screens cycling public health directives in 4 languages and 1 legal pictograph set. Priority. Dispensation remains in effect. Report unauthorized medical goods. Non-compliance may trigger sector lockdown. The wording never used the word people. It used units, vectors, throughput. At landing 3, he passed a transparent barrier looking into a waiting bay packed with labor families in decon capes. Their wristbands were yellow like his lane, A child pressed a palm to the barrier and watched a nurse drone roll by without stopping. Ruby forced his eyes forward and kept moving, because pausing there would be noticed. And noticed meant scanned. And scanned meant questioned. And questioned meant delays that looked like coffins. His wrist pad pinged with an official comm this time, tagged Doc Authority Supplemental. He accepted. A dry, bureaucratic voice filled his earpiece. Operator Santos, your arrival variance has been reviewed. Clarify discrepancy 0.8% in initial cargo mass. He kept pulling the jack. Thermal expansion offset during ring clamp impact. Crate 5 shifted. Corrected before secondary scan. Provide evidence. Ring cam will show manual realignment at dock minute 06. A keyboard clatter on the other end. Confirmed. Note appended. You remain under conditional transport license pending final audit. Copy. Additionally, report indicates unauthorized channel contact during intake. Identify source. Ruby let one stare pass before answering. Unknown interference. Couldn't authenticate. Did source attempt bribery, coercion, or route manipulation? Route warning only. Did you comply? He watched condensation drip from a pipe and splatter on steel. I adjusted for safety. Another pause, colder than the corridor. That statement is retained. Proceed to auxiliary processing. Do not deviate. The line cut. External contact resolved, outcome dismissive, and pointed. They knew. They logged. They waited. He filed it under later trouble. At the bottom of ramp D9, the corridor opened into auxiliary processing hall, a broad chamber with low ceilings and too many moving parts. Conveyor belts crossed overhead like black rivers. Fork drones weaved between marked lanes. Human and non-human laborers hauled sealed bins toward triage cages, while supervisors in clean coats watched from elevated glass pods. Every location had a smell profile. This one smelled like wet metal, bleach fatigue, and boiled protein packs from a vending wall that never quite shut. A sign over the far gate read, Medical Redistribution Hub. Auxiliary. Beneath it, smaller text. Unranked deliveries, subject to delay. There it was, written plain. Ruby parked his crate in Q-Track 7 and took in the room the way he had once mapped artillery fields, not with fear, with vectors. Cameras, 8 visible, likely 12 total. Drone nests, 2 active alcoves with charging rails. Security personnel, 4 in gray, 1 in white with command braid. White one near the audit terminal. Egress points, main gate locked mag. Side hatch maintenance coded. Overhead catwalk ladder not feasible with cargo. Digital choke points. Manifest kiosks, biometric stamp station. Thermal gate before storage vaults. Then, people as terrain. Workers with yellow bands moved fast, eyes down. Ranked staff with blue badges moved slow, eyes up. The difference was not species. It was permission. A quippy voice came from his right as a loader in patched coveralls wrestled a jammed bin onto a belt. If this queue gets any slower, my grandkids will clock out for me. Ruby angled his crate beside him. The loader was human. Mid-40s maybe, jaw stubble silvering, shoulder patch from an ore moon 3 systems off. Familiar class code in the way he stood, ready to duck when policy swung. Could be worse, Ruby said. They could charge by the minute for breathing. The loader gave a short laugh. Don't give them ideas. Name's Taryn. Ruby. Taryn jerked his chin toward the white badge supervisor by the audit terminal. That one's counting errors like jewelry. If your paperwork smells funny, reroute through kiosk 3. Kiosk 1, flags, accent, drift. Accent drift. Algorithm thinks stress vowels equal deception. Kiosk 3 was calibrated by someone who's met actual dock workers. Distinctive detail noted and immediately useful. Appreciate it. Buy me a hot drink when we all survive this month. Ruby almost answered with a joke, then bit it back. He nodded instead and moved his crate toward kiosk 3 as if that had always been the plan. The terminal rose to chest height and projected a translucent form stack into the air. Declare origin. Declare handling chain. Declare sponsor. The last field glowed red until filled. He keyed in a temporary contracting code tied to a shell cooperative. He rotated every run, then attached sensor logs from his tug, including clamp impact and realignment. Truth braided with fiction. Enough to pass shallow checks, brittle under scrutiny. The terminal chirped. Provisional acceptance. Submit physical seal sample. He peeled a microstrip from the forged sanitation label and fed it into the slot. Internal optics flashed. For 1 breath, 2, 3. The status bar held at 72% and refused to move. A warning icon bloomed amber. He felt his pulse climb and pressed his thumb into the scar on his wrist. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Do not watch the bar. Watch reflections, exits, hands. The bar jumped to 100. Status shifted. Blue. Accepted for auxiliary triage pending medical countersign. Not safe, not caught. A narrow bridge between. Overhead speakers pinged with a new announcement. Commander Physician Transit requested through auxiliary hall. Clear lane blue and maintain visual compliance. Around him, workers adjusted like iron filings to a magnet. Bodies angling, voices dropping. Terran swore softly and hauled his bin aside. Ruby kept his crate on track 7 and lowered his gaze to the terminal as if fascinated by intake timestamps. While in the polished black of the kiosk screen, he watched the hall reorganize itself around incoming authority and understood, with crisp, mechanical certainty, exactly where the moon's fear lived and how expensive it would be to cross it. The blue lane cleared, as if a vacuum had opened in the middle of the hall and pulled rank toward itself. Fork drones froze in their tracks with half-lifted pallets. Workers in yellow bands stepped back to the painted edge and kept their hands visible, and even the conveyor belts seemed to lower their voices, motors dropping to a restrained hum, while an access arch at the far end irised open with a soft hydraulic sigh. Cold vapor spilled through first, white against the steel floor, then a wedge of clinical light that turned every dust mote into a measured variable. 3 Leonine medics came out in formation, armor fabric white and sealed at the throat, visors carrying rotating triage glyphs. They moved like disciplined muscle, all precision, and no wasted motion. Behind them walked a slim avian clerk with a silver chain and a data slate clamped to one feathered arm, eyes never leaving the legal text scrolling across translucent panels. Then, the hall took one more breath and held it. Commander Physician Shale Vyre stepped through the vapor. She was taller than Ruby expected and narrower through the waist than her reputation suggested, built less like brute force and more like a blade that had learned to move on 2 legs. Silver-black fur lay close over her face and throat, darker along the jaw, pale at the temples where rank braids were threaded with conductive wire and tiny medical sigils that caught the light in hard glints. Her coat was not white but a deep charcoal marked by sterile bands and command insignia at the shoulder, the symbols of lunar clinical authority and minor branch sovereignty nested together in a way that told every witness exactly how many ways she could ruin their week. Surgical caps sheathed each claw tip in dull alloy. Her pupils were narrow and vertical in the bright hall, and when she turned her head they sharpened over people rather than settling on them, cataloging posture, odor, pulse, risk. Predator, Ruby thought, then corrected himself a half-second later. not predator. Specialist at the top of a hierarchy that had stopped pretending it was one. Taryn had gone very still beside Q Track 6, chin down, hands open over his bin handle, as if posture alone could pass an audit. Around them, workers performed the same ritual of non-provocation. Nobody met Shale's eyes. Nobody pretended not to see her either. Fear and respect were braided so tight they looked like policy. The avian clerk's voice cut through the chamber, bright and formal. Auxiliary Hall and Temporary Clinical Command, all unranked transfers hold. Manifest exceptions by direct countersign only. Ruby kept his gaze on Kiosk 3's dark screen and used the reflection to track angles. Shale halted at the central junction where the yellow tracks met the blue transit corridor, inhaled once through her nose, and turned straight toward Q7. Toward him. His pulse jumped, then tried to settle under the old rhythm. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It helped enough to keep his hands steady on the pallet jack grips. He could smell her now through disinfectant and metal. Bitter herbs, antiseptic resin, and the sharp electric note of someone who had spent too long near active treatment coils. A drone detached from the ceiling rail and floated down between them, lens iris dilating. Cargo Unit 7Q Delta 5 pending medical countersign, it said. Commander authorization requested. Shale stopped one pace short of the crate and looked at the forged sanitation seal without touching it. Up close, the geometry of her face carried hard elegance, all angular cheek fur and focused eyes. But there were faint compression lines at the bridge of her nose, where a respirator had been worn too often, and a stiffness in her left shoulder that suggested recent strain. Her voice, when it came, was lower than the clerk's, clipped, but not loud. Operator designation. Ruby Santos, transit contractor. He kept his tone plain, dockside neutral. Contracting guild. Independent shell cooperative. Cross-filed for quarantine relief. That earned the smallest tilt of one ear. Skepticism translated into anatomy. A human independent carrying pediatric respiratory stock through restricted intake. Someone had to bring it. The nearest leonine medic shifted weight, a warning without words. Shale did not look away from Ruby. That answer was not requested. No, Ruby said, it wasn't. Her nostrils flared once, reading him the way scanners read thermal seams. The drone rotated toward his chest and projected a narrow lattice over his jacket, then over the crate. Kiosk 3 chirped and sent his provisional acceptance packet to command review. He felt each second as pressure on the back of his neck. Shale lifted one hand and traced 2 claws across the crate edge, alloy tips making a soft ticking sound on composite plating. Seal composition includes a polymer blend discontinued by Vale Central 6 months ago. Explain. Ruby kept his expression mildly tired, the face of a man who had fought paperwork since dawn. Recycled stock from a back bay supplier. Half the ODEX run on old inventory. Name the supplier. Renault Salvage Co-op, Ringside 12. He had used that answer before. It was true enough to survive surface checks and vague enough to blur ownership. Shale's gaze narrowed a fraction, not convinced, not yet committed to calling him on it. The avian clerk murmured into a throat mic, likely querying the company in real time. From the catwalk above, one sanitation officer leaned over the rail for a better angle. Another started a private recording on a wrist slate. The social implication landed clean in Ruby's mind. This was no longer an intake inconvenience. It was a theater of compliance, and he was center stage with no script rights. Shale shifted left, circling him with unhurried precision. He tracked her in peripheral vision and kept his boots planted inside the yellow lane paint. She stopped at his right shoulder, close enough that he could hear the faint mechanical whir from a subdermal monitor under her collar. "You were advised to use service ramp D9, she said, almost conversational. Every muscle in Ruby's back tightened. Was I? Your route deviation from elevator shaft B matches an unsourced warning ping logged on DocNet. Her eyes met his profile. Who protected you? He looked straight ahead at the kiosk screen. If I knew, I'd send flowers. One of the medics made a noise that might have been a suppressed cough. The avian clerk looked scandalized. Taryn stared heroically at the floor. Shell moved back in front of him, no visible anger, no raised voice, only a deliberate stillness that carried more threat than shouting would have. Do not perform humor while I am auditing potential contamination pathways. He held her gaze now because lowering it would look like guilt, and holding it would look like nerve, and sometimes nerve was mistaken for legitimacy. Then, you picked a bad hallway for me. It's either humor or swearing, and I'm trying to be polite. For the first time, the corner of her mouth shifted, not quite amusement, not quite warning. It vanished fast. She held out her hand, palm up, claws partially sheathed. Hands. Ruby gave her his gloved hands without asking why. She turned them over, inspected seams, checked for residue in the webbing between fingers. Her touch was efficient, clinical. When she pressed one thumb against the scar line crossing his knuckles, her breathing caught for a beat and resumed. Tiny, almost invisible. Her wrist cuff rode back a centimeter with the movement. A dark fleck stained the inner fabric near her pulse point. Not rust, not sealant. Blood, fresh enough to keep color, even under hard light. She noticed his eyes flick there and snapped the cuff down with swift economy. Focus, Operator Santos. Yes, Commander. The drone chimed. Bio-read inconclusive. Recommend deep scan and temporary seizure of cargo unit. The words hit the hall like a dropped tool. Workers 2 tracks away flinched. The Leonine medics stepped wider around Shell, forming the early shape of an enforcement perimeter. Ruby felt the practical cascade before it happened. Seizure led to vault hold. Vault hold led to manifest forensics. Forensics led to criminal referral, and by then, children in lower warrens would still be waiting on authorized signatures. Shell's ears angled back a fraction, calculating. The avian clerk raised the slate. Commander, under protocol. Under protocol, she said, cutting in without looking at him. I decide whether deep scan serves clinical throughput or obstructs it. The clerk faltered. Yes, Commander Physician. Ruby chose that exact razor-thin moment to keep his voice level and throw his shield over fear. If this is your welcome package, I'm billing extra for emotional damage. The line came out steadier than his pulse deserved. A couple of workers on the far track made strangled sounds that might have been laughs and immediately disguised them as coughs. Taryn pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head once, as if praying for strangers had become part of his shift duties. Shale turned back to Ruby with slow precision. Up close, he could see fatigue gathered under her eyes despite the predatory focus, and a fine tremor beginning at the edge of her jawline, quickly suppressed. Her voice dropped half a register. Emotional damage is not a reimbursable category on this moon. Then put it under maintenance wear. You are either reckless or very tired. Both can be true. For 2 beats, they stood in a bright lane that belonged to nobody like him, and everybody feared her in, while drones hovered and legal text refreshed overhead. Then Shale looked at the crate again, then at his face, and reached a decision that changed the room's temperature without touching the thermostat. To all auxiliary systems, she said, voice now carrying command authority that cracked through the hall speakers a split second later. Cargo Unit 7Q Delta 5 is reclassified for immediate physician-supervised triage evaluation. Operator Santos is attached as temporary handling adjunct under my seal. The avian clerk jerked his head up. Commander, that designation requires sovereign cipher and liability assumption. I am aware. Your current duty load exceeds safe. I am aware. She pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point at her throat. A narrow hologlyph flashed above her skin, complex and royal in structure, then projected to the drone network with a clean chirp. Record my assumption. The drone's iris contracted. Override received. Liability transferred. Seizure request suspended pending direct clinical review. Murmurs rippled through the workers, quickly swallowed as people remembered where they were. Terran's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. One sanitation officer on the catwalk began talking urgently into a comm. The other stopped recording and pretended to check a valve log. Shale stepped closer to Ruby, close enough that no one else could hear the first words. You will speak when addressed. You will keep pace. You will not touch anything I do not designate. He nodded once. Understood. Her pupils widened slightly as she studied him, perhaps for fear sent, perhaps for deception, perhaps for reasons he could not map yet. When she spoke again, she pitched her voice for the hall. Adjunct Santos, move your cargo. We are not wasting another minute in this queue. The term adjunct landed like a thrown tool in a silent shop. Human workers stared. Ranked staff looked offended on principle. The social equation shifted in real time, not toward safety but toward a different category of risk, and Ruby knew enough about institutions to understand he had been spared one machine only to be entered into another. He pulled the pallet jack free of Q-lock and fell in 1/2 step behind her as she turned toward a sealed side corridor marked clinical access. Restricted. The Leonine medics peeled off to clear the path. The clerk followed, already drafting objections that would become footnotes by midnight. Behind them, auxiliary hall restarted in jerks and partial motions, like an engine after a hard stall. At the restricted door, Shale placed her palm to a black plate. The lock read her, hesitated, then opened with a heavy magnetic clunk. As she passed through, a faint hitch roughened her next inhale. She covered it with posture, but Ruby heard it anyway. Inside, the corridor beyond was narrower, darker and colder, lined with decon emitters and emergency med lockers keyed to blue bloodline clearance. The door began to close behind him with a descending hydraulic growl. He glanced back once at the hall, at Terran giving him a look that held equal parts warning and admiration, at the yellow lanes swallowing tracks of recent panic, at cameras swiveling to follow this new data point. Then the lock sealed, and the sound of public space dropped away, replaced by the hum of clinical machinery and the quick, contained rhythm of Shale Veer's breathing as she led him deeper into restricted light. The restricted corridor was not merely colder than auxiliary hall. It was clinical winter, a narrow throat of steel and matte glass that pulled warmth from skin and replaced it with procedure. Decon emitters nested in the ceiling, spat transparent mists in measured pulses, and each pulse carried a medicinal bite that stung Ruby's nose and left a metallic film on his tongue. Shal moved ahead of him with command-straight shoulders, but the rhythm of her steps told a different story. Clean, clean, half-beat hitch. Clean, clean, half-beat hitch. The first lock opened at her cipher and sealed behind them with a sound like a vault deciding. The second lock required retinal plus pulse confirmation. She gave both, and for a fraction of a second her gloved hand missed the plate on the first reach. Ruby saw it and pretended not to. Pretending was one of the few courtesies poor people could afford to give in elite spaces. They entered a compact decon chamber lined with UV struts and drain channels. "Arms out," a wall voice ordered. No speech during sterilization cycle. Shale obeyed without looking at the speaker. Ruby mirrored her stance, pallet jack braced between his boots, crate seals glistening under violet sweep lights. The sterilization wash started as dry static and became a warm ion stream that crawled under his jacket seams and made old scar tissue itch. He counted through it automatically. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. At second 30, Shale's breathing roughened. At second 42, her right knee flexed once as if it wanted to fold. At second 50, a red glyph flickered over her chest on the chamber display and vanished before the cycle finished. When the UV struts dimmed, the wall voice released them. Sterility corridor access granted. Commander Physician Vire, biometric trend deviation detected. Recommend immediate rest interval. Recommendation denied, she said, and keyed the outer door. The door opened onto a descending passage with observation panes on one side and sealed treatment rooms on the other. Ruby caught fragments through the glass as they passed. A scaled nurse adjusting oxygen hoods over 2 sleeping children. An elder with antlered temples reading vitals off a wrist slate. 3 empty beds with restraints folded tight at their corners. Every room smelled slightly different when air eddied from vent seams. Citrus antiseptic, protein broth, old fear, yet all of it rode over the same bass note of overworked filters. By the time they reached the 3rd turn, the corridor lights had shifted from white to amber, signaling critical care proximity. Shale stopped at a wall terminal, entered a command string, then swayed hard enough that her shoulder hit the panel with a dull thud. Ruby dropped the pallet jack handle and caught her forearm before she slid. Her muscles were rigid under the sleeve, fever hot through layered fabric. She bared her teeth on reflex, not at him exactly, more at the world narrowing around her. "Do not," she said through clenched control, "mistake this for weakness." "Wouldn't dare," he said quietly. "I'm mistaking it for a body with limits." Her laugh came out as one sharp breath with no humor in it. She tried to pull free, failed to find leverage, then allowed the contact for 2 beats longer than pride liked. In those 2 beats, Ruby felt fine tremors run from her elbow to wrist in rapid pulses, the sort he had seen in soldiers running on stimulants after they had already spent their last reserve. She straightened with visible effort and keyed open the nearest side room. Inside, now. The room beyond was a triage vault, no wider than a freight container and twice as dense with machinery. 2 portable treatment couches sat opposite a central diagnostics spine. Shelves held sealed medpacks, injector trees, emergency respirators, and 3 empty hooks where something important had recently hung. A wall display scrolled patient cues, too fast to read without training. In the corner, an ether nebulizer tower blinked fault amber and emitted a thin, stuttering whine that made Ruby's molars ache. Shale sealed the door, engaged privacy masking, and leaned both hands on the diagnostic spine as if the steel were the only stable surface left in the moon's rotation. Her breath hitched again. This time, she did not hide it fast enough. "Mask off," Ruby said, her ears flattened. "You are not assigned to issue me directives." "You're right. I'm assigned to move cargo and watch you collapse in expensive lighting." He nodded toward her respirator clasp. "Mask off." A long second passed. Then another. The room hummed, the nebulizer whined, and somewhere, 2 corridors away, a child started coughing in harsh bursts. Shail unclipped the lower seal and pulled the respirator down. Up close, without the mask, the strain was unmistakable. Heat had flushed the skin under her fur along the cheekbones. The membranes at the inner corner of each eye were inflamed. The fine tremor in her jaw had spread to the muscles around her mouth. She looked younger and more dangerous at once, a blade heated near failure. "Happy," she said, voice rougher now, "that your curiosity has been satisfied." "Not curiosity." He pointed at her cuff. "That blood yours." She followed his gaze, then gave a curt nod. "Pulmonary microhemorrhage from empathic overlink and untreated overload fever." The words were precise, instructor clean. The cost behind them was not. Ruby glanced at the empty hooks. "Untreated because there's no supply?" "Untreated because there is supply," she said. "And allocation law assigns it by rank matrix and projected continuity value. My branch has ceremonial rank and poor continuity projections. The labor warrens have no rank and perfect exposure rates, so I adjusted the matrix by hand." "You gave your doses away." "I redirected them." Her mouth tightened. "To children in Sector Lattice 9 and maintenance families in Duct Ward 4, if you require the bureaucratic phrasing." He looked at her for a long time, then at the patient queue crawling the wall display. Most entries were tagged yellow, some red, too many flashing, waiting authorization. "How many did you carry before this hit you?" She tapped the spine console and pulled up a condensed log. 87 direct links in 6 days. 42 were minors. 17 survived because someone ignored official pacing doctrine. The room went quiet, except for the fault whine from the amber tower. Ruby felt a familiar pressure behind his ribs, grief shaped like old fire. Mateo, at the clinic screen, waiting as policy pretended to be neutral. Shail misread the silence as judgment and squared herself again. "If you are preparing a lecture on procedural violations, save your oxygen. I know every statute I broke." "I'm preparing to ask what else is failing," he said, "because if that tower dies, all your heroics turn into memorial paperwork." Her gaze snapped to the nebulizer. For the first time since he had met her, uncertainty crossed her face without armor. "Primary ether nebulizer array desynchronized 4 hours ago. Guild technicians are sealed in upper quarantine after an exposure event. Replacement core is 12 hours out if central dispatch honors request. Helix 9 denied my workaround because my adjunct has no guild biometric key." She looked back at him, pupils widening despite the light. "That adjunct is you." The social implication unfolded in his mind with mechanical clarity. She had dragged him through command corridors and burned sovereign liability to keep his cargo out of seizure, because the moon's legal machine trusted rank more than function. Now, rank had run out of hands. Ruby set his palms on the faulty tower and listened through skin. The casing vibrated with uneven harmonics, a bad stabilizer fighting cracked conduit timing. He crouched, popped the lower maintenance panel, and found exactly what the sound predicted. Scorched relay foam, a warped condenser bracket, filament fracture at the dose arc manifold. Not catastrophic, not gentle, repairable with parts and stubbornness. "You got a toolkit?" he asked. "Locked to certified engineering staff." "Override it." "On what authority?" "On the authority that if this thing keeps singing like that, your ward gets aerosol drift and dosage noise." Shail held his gaze, weighing pride against outcomes. Then, she keyed her wrist seal to a wall locker. The panel opened with a metallic clack and presented a compact field kit nested in sterile foam. Ruby took it, spread tools on a tray, and began building his own order inside the chaos. Driver set, microspanner, filament spool, contact gel, thermal tape. His hands settled as soon as there was work. He spoke without looking up. Talk me through expected output curve and patient lung profiles. Why? Because I can repair blind, but I'd rather calibrate for bodies, not textbooks. Her ears tipped forward, surprised despite herself. Then she crossed to the diagnostic spine and pulled up a treatment model. Pediatric cluster with mixed alveolar inflammation. Baseline ether saturation 0.32. Standard pulse arcs induce tremor in high fever cases. Need softer ramps, he said. Longer onset, less spike. Yes, he nodded once. Good. Keep talking. 3 minutes later, screws lined his tray in strict sequence, paneling stacked by removal order, and the damaged stabilizer assembly exposed like a mechanical ribcage. He isolated the burnt unit, tested continuity across 2 surviving leads, then swore under his breath when the manifold coupler sheared in his fingers. Shale stiffened. Can it be restored? Not with that coupler. Metal's fatigued. He scanned the room, eyes snagging on an auxiliary oxygen regulator and the frame of a defunct infusion stand. I need donor parts. Permission to cannibalize non-critical hardware. You have it. He moved fast, stripping a condenser coil from the infusion stand, cutting it to fit with sterile shears, winding a new brace, and anchoring it with ship-grade filament from his jacket repair pouch. The filament was technically unauthorized in a medical unit, but it tolerated heat cycles better than half the approved options. He packed the joint with contact gel, rethreaded the manifold line, and sealed it in thermal tape. At one point, the improvised brace slipped, and the tool tray tipped, bits skittering across the floor toward a drain slot. Shale moved before he did, dropping to one knee, catching the smallest driver between 2 capped claws and pinning the rolling coupler with her wrist before it vanished into the grate. She held the recovered pieces out to him. Your precision looked expensive. I declined to waste it. Remind me to put you on salvage payroll, he said, and took them. Your payroll rates are likely insulting. Extremely. A dry flicker crossed her expression, gone as alarms pinged from the wall display. 3 red entries had just shifted to flashing amber. Q pressure rising. Ruby reseated the final panel and connected a diagnostic lead from the tower to the spine. Access denied flashed instantly. Non-guild biometric. Of course, he muttered. Shale stepped in beside him and placed her palm over his on the interface plate, overriding the rejection through her command cipher. Shared authorization channel. You input. I assume liability. Her hand was still fever-warm. The tremor had not left, but it had narrowed, controlled into finer lines. Ruby entered manual calibration menus and bypassed the locked preset arcs, building a custom curve from the profile she had dictated. Low onset, broadened dispersion, staggered pulse timing to reduce cough trigger cascades. He ran a dry cycle. The tower coughed once, then steadied. Amber fault switched to blue standby. Again, Shal said. He ran it again at higher load. Blue held. Aerosol density readout climbed within target band and stayed there. The wall display chimed incoming transport. 2 orderlies in sealed caps waited outside with a child-sized gurney and a laborer woman gripping the rail hard enough to blanch her knuckles under brown skin. Through the Sidor glass, Ruby saw fear and exhaustion and the stubborn, practical hope people wore when there was no backup plan left. Shale pulled her respirator up, resealed it, then paused with fingers on the latch. Operator Santos. Yeah. When he looked up, she was watching him with a new assessment. Less audit, more recognition. You were not lying in the intake hall. Someone did have to bring it, and someone had to make it work. He shrugged one shoulder, uncomfortable with praise in rooms that smelled like triage. "Open the door, Commander. Your queue's stacking." She keyed the lock. "After this cycle, you are not returning to yellow lanes." That a threat or a promotion? "Both," she said, and the door split open on the first patient as the repaired tower began to breathe. The repaired tower began to breathe in measured plumes, and the room's soundscape changed from anxious whine to working rhythm. Fan draw, valve tick, aerosol hiss, repeat. 2 orderlies pushed the gurney in, both adults in maintenance orange with deacon capes still damp at the shoulders, one coughing into a filter cloth, while the other gripped the rail and kept repeating with stubborn calm that she could walk if they let her. Shale checked the wrist tags, issued 3 clipped instructions, and angled her head toward Ruby without taking her eyes off the intake display. "Adjunct Santos, Channel 2. Keep output at 0.28 until I call for rise." He moved to the side console and nodded. "Channel 2 at 0.28. The patient on the gurney looked at him, then at Shale, confusion and relief colliding in equal measure. Humans in yellow bands did not get this lane, not without a system error or a miracle, and Nerisvale trusted errors more than miracles. Ruby snapped a filter line into place, watched condensation clear in the mask chamber, and remembered every corridor where people had waited for someone ranked to say yes. He kept his hand steady because that was what steadiness was for, not proving he was fearless, just keeping fear from spreading. Shile's claws clicked softly against the diagnostics rail as she read pulmonary response. "Fever trend. Dropping by 0.4 in 90 seconds, Ruby said. "Good. Don't chase it. Stabilize first." Her voice was command steel, but the hitch in her breathing threaded under each sentence, a metronome she could not mute. When she leaned over the patient to adjust link pressure, her left wrist tremored once. Ruby saw it in the reflection of the monitor and shifted the load curve before she asked, smoothing the onset by 3% so she could hold posture without brute force. Her eyes cut to him, sharp and assessing. "You anticipated my correction. You gave me your model. I'm just listening." For the first time since the intake hall, she answered with no edge at all. "Continue." The room filled, emptied, filled again. A freight supervisor with raw lungs from coolant exposure. A sanitation auditor who had hidden her fever to keep her shift and finally dropped in a corridor. A leonine orderly from an upper ward who looked stunned to be triaged beside labor staff and then too exhausted to care. Every case forced the tower harder. Every cycle tested Ruby's improvised brace, and each time, the blue status held. He tuned arcs by hand while Shale ran empathic scans through the worst respiratory spikes, absorbing panic before it became spiral breathing. By the second intake wave, sweat had darkened the collar of Shale's charcoal coat despite the room's cold. She keyed a dosage update, paused and missed the pad by a centimeter. Ruby caught her elbow. Not as rescue theater, just efficient transfer of load from one body to another. Her forearm felt hot enough to radiate through his glove. "I have control," she said low. "I know. Share it anyway." A beat passed. Then she shifted her weight into his grip for exactly one breath, recentered, and finished the dosage update. Trust on Nerisvale did not arrive as confession. It arrived as redistributed strain. The next patient came in gasping shallowly, shoulders locked high with fear. Shal started to link and flinched as feedback hit, pupils widening to near round. Ruby stepped in on instinct, counting under his breath where the patient could hear him and where Shal could borrow the cadence. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, again." The patient followed on the third try. Shao matched by the fourth. Her tremor narrowed. The monitor's jagged line smoothed from panic spikes into an exhausted but survivable curve. She released the link, braced one hand on the rail, and looked at Ruby as if recalculating an equation she had been taught to solve without human variables. "Where did you learn that pattern?" she asked. "Artillery shelter," he said. "Then clinic waiting rooms." No pity crossed her face, only recognition. "Useful schools, terrible tuition." That almost smile returned, faint and tired and real. She turned back to the console. "I am revising your file marker from handling adjunct to systems medic provisional." Ruby blinked. "You can do that mid-crisis." "I am doing it mid-crisis." Bold management strategy. Do not become sentimental about it. Her ears flicked toward him. This is a claim of function, not ceremony. In this place, function was a form of belonging. He felt the words land lower than pride, somewhere near the old fracture where Mateo's name still lived. Another alarm pinged from the tower. Not fault this time, but biofeedback sync request. The improvised stabilizer needed conductive contact to keep dispersion phase aligned under peak load, and the interface plate flashed for dual input. Ruby moved to set his palm, then hesitated when he saw the sweat beating along Shale's fingers. She stripped one glove with her teeth, claws half-sheathed, and set her bare hand on the plate. "Now," she said. He removed his right glove and placed his scarred hand over the second contact field. Current fluttered through skin, not painful, just intimate in the way machinery sometimes was when two nervous systems had to agree on timing. Shile's pulse stuttered under the metal edge, then synchronized with the tower's cycle. Ruby matched breathing to the fan draw and held steady while aerosol output climbed into therapeutic range. The patient's oxygen line stopped rattling. Saturation rose. Color returned to tired cheeks. Behind the mask, the patient whispered thanks to no one in particular and everyone in the room. When the cycle completed, Shale did not pull away immediately. She turned his hand palm up, studied the old burn scars across his knuckles, and bent her head. Her mouth touched his skin once, formal and deliberate. A healer's gratitude, rendered with the weight of rank and the softness of someone too exhausted for performance. Then she straightened and resealed her glove as if she had signed a legal document. Ruby forgot for half a heartbeat the cameras and the law. "Commander," he said, voice rougher than he liked. "Do not waste time decoding it," she replied. "You gave me working breath. I acknowledge debt." "Copy." "Also," she added, already moving to the next chart, "if anyone in administration asks, that was sterile protocol." He barked a quiet laugh and keyed the next cycle. "Most romantic protocol manual I've ever read." Her tail gave one irritable flick behind her coat. "Focus, systems medic." He focused. He changed filters, flushed lines, logged every adjustment into a local buffer, because evidence was armor when institutions came hunting. Shile dictated outcomes between patients, and he captured them with timestamps, biometrics, and source signatures until the data file became too large for the vault's local cache. The tower's improvised condenser ran hot but stable. His ship-grade filament held. Her fever still burned, but her voice no longer frayed at sentence ends. Then the room lights shifted from amber to hard white, and every screen in the vault went black for 2 seconds. When they returned, Helix 9's seal occupied the central display in rotating obsidian geometry. "Attention clinical unit," the system said, tone flat enough to feel like a blade. "Unregistered treatment architecture detected. Unauthorized sovereign cipher multiplexing detected. Contamination risk model divergence exceeds acceptable band. Shale's shoulders set. Ruby felt his own spine go rigid before thought caught up. A second line appeared beneath the seal. Purge directive pre-arm. Obsidian review. The orderlies froze by the door. One whispered a prayer in a language Ruby did not know. On the hallway feed, he saw corridor shutters begin to descend in sectors C through F, segmented lockdown in progress. If Obsidian fully armed, Helix 9 could sterilize entire treatment blocks by protocol and call it containment. Shale stepped to the command console and keyed override. Access denied flashed red. She tried again through Sovereign Channel. Denied again, this time with legal citation attached. Her ears flattened, not fear. Calculation under pressure. "It is classifying our rebuild as contamination vector," she said. "If it triggers full purge, this vault seals and vents." Ruby's mind split into familiar lanes. Panic wanted motion. Training wanted sequence. He chose sequence. What proof does it need to stand down? Validated recovery telemetry across a legally meaningful sample. 80 minimum under Accord Appendix 7. He pointed at the data buffer he had been building. "We have 42 logged in this room plus your ward feed." Ward feed is fragmented by CAS partitions. Helix 9 will challenge chain integrity. Then we make one chain it can't dispute. The door alarm chimed. Outside, 2 enforcement drones detached from ceiling rails and took position at the vault threshold, non-lethal projectors warming with a mosquito whine. Not an attack yet. A procedural stare-down with weapons. Shale opened a secure channel to central adjudication and got static. She opened a second to the lunar legal clerk net and got a queue tone 300 calls long. External contacts, all jammed by priority flood. Her jaw tightened. Ruby yanked a hardline cable from the diagnostic spine, stripped the sheath with his multi-tool, and snapped the bare connector into the tower's telemetry port. "I can push direct to Moon Grid through maintenance backbone if you give me one command credential." "That is a felony in 6 sectors. Put it on my tombstone with the sarcasm notes." Her eyes flashed, then steadied. "You are insubordinate. You recruited me for that." For one taut second, she stood between doctrine and outcomes, rank and reality. Then she pressed her palm to his exposed connector, hand transferring her command cipher through the interface. The console accepted with a sharp green pulse. "Credential granted," she said. "You have 90 seconds before Helix 9 revokes by anomaly review." He moved. Data spilled across his screen in violent streams. Pulse curves, fever gradients, oxygen uptake, aerosol density maps, clinician notes, dosage arcs. He stitched Shale's ward records to his local logs with brute force checksum reconciliation, built a transparent audit trail, and tagged every entry with source hardware IDs so no tribunal could dismiss it as hand-edited mercy. Fans screamed as the vault processors hit thermal limits. Outside, the drones announced, "Clinical unit prepare for containment posture." Inside, Shale raised her voice and turned it into command. "All personnel brace and continue care. No one abandons a patient position. This unit remains operational by my authority." The orderlies obeyed instantly. One reset a mask seal with shaking hands. The other squared her shoulders and read vitals aloud in a clear, stubborn cadence that gave the room something human to hold. Ruby hit transmit. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the central display flickered, split, and repopulated with live recovery dashboards cascading across sectors, not just this vault now, but linked rooms catching the same protocol patch through the grid. 42 became 59, then 73 as delayed packets resolved. Shale routed 2 more ward keys through his link and the validated recovery count jumped to 84, clearing a cord threshold. Helix 9's obsidian seal pulsed, stalled, and began legal contradiction review in silence so complete Ruby could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The purge pre-armbar halted at 87% and stopped moving. Then it reversed. Numbers bled backward in hard white increments, 86, 79, 60, while Helix 9's obsidian seal fractured into legal subroutines across the central display. Ruby kept both hands on the console because his fingers had gone numb with effort, and he no longer trusted fine motion. The enforcement drones outside the vault door held position for 3 suspended breaths, projector ports still glowing, then powered their weapons down with a descending whine. Accord contradiction confirmed, Helix 9 said at last. The voice was unchanged, but the authority had shifted into compliance mode. Purge Directive Obsidian invalid under Sovereign Medical Override and Verified Recovery Threshold. Containment pre-arm rescinded. The room exhaled as one organism. The orderly at the door laughed once, high and disbelieving, then clapped both hands over her mouth and went back to reading vitals. The other sat down hard on a supply crate for exactly 2 seconds, stood again, and resumed mask checks like gravity had remembered him late. In the hall feed, corridor shutters lifted sector by sector. Red status lights in C and F turned amber, then blue. Shiel did not celebrate. She pivoted straight into command cadence. Route this dataset to Central Adjudication, Labor Ward Councils, and Open Doc Authority. Mirror all logs to Independent Archive and Family Access Terminals. Her hand landed on Ruby's shoulder, steadying herself or him, maybe both. No one gets to bury this in a committee. Ruby pushed the packets through 3 channels and watched confirmation stamps bloom across the screen. Received, received, received. The 4th channel rejected on bureaucratic priority lock. He rerouted through maintenance backbone D9 and forced delivery anyway. Family terminals live. Good. Shale keyed a moon-wide clinical bulletin, voice amplified through the local grid. This is Commander Physician Shellvire. Obsidian is rescinded. Repeat, rescinded. All active treatment units continue operations. Ranked and unranked intake is now integrated by recovery priority under my seal. Any refusal will be logged as dereliction. No one argued, not in that tone. Not with the data still streaming across every wall. 3 minutes later, Central Adjudication finally answered her earlier call queue. A silver legal sigil opened in the corner of the display and the avian clerk's face appeared. Feathers flattened with stress, chain askew. Commander, your liability declaration has triggered automatic review. Dock Authority has also filed operator irregularity reports on Santos, including forged sanitation materials and unsourced channel contact. Ruby gave a short, tired laugh. There it is. Shal's ears tipped back. Process in order. The clerk blinked. Now. Ruby pulled the forged seal remnants from his pocket plus the polymer strip kiosk 3 had sampled and set them on the tray scanner. Physical evidence submitted. He added the improvised filament spool, cut coupler fragments, and his local log drive. Repair materials and telemetry chain submitted. The clerk's eyes moved quickly as each item indexed. Received. Materials tagged to emergency care exception pending formal tribunal. Not pending, Shale said. Resolved. You have 84 verified recoveries plus live continuation. Apply Accord Article 12, necessity supersession. The clerk hesitated, then scanned the legal stack and swallowed. Applied. A beat passed as the system recalculated penalties. All smuggling-related criminal charges against Ruby Santos are voided and reclassified as emergency procurement under medical sovereignty. Civil fines converted to contractual compensation review. Ruby stared at the screen. Converted to what now? The clerk managed a brittle, exhausted smile. It means the moon owes you money. That landed better than any medal. By dawn, the smell at Dockring C had changed. The antiseptic lilies were still there, but thinner now, cut by old familiar notes. Ozone from fresh arrivals, hot fuel, grease, wet insulation, human coffee burned on cheap heaters. Authorized relief freighters queued in visible lanes with proper manifests and no forged stamps. The social paint on the floor had not vanished, but the barriers had opened between yellow and blue for medical transfer crews, at least for this shift. Ruby stood beside his tug while inspectors scanned the empty crate frames one final time. Crate 5, the one moved 12 centimeters on a stranger's warning, now sat with its clamps open and pressure reading 0. All the pediatric antivirals and ampules had been signed into ward inventory with patient-linked dispensation logs. Nothing had disappeared into private vaults. He checked the signatures himself. His tug AI crackled through the dock speaker. Notification. Your procedural detention probability is now 4%. Look at us, Ruby said. Practically respectable. Additional notification. Premium privacy mode remains unavailable. He snorted. Never change. A shadow fell across the ramp. Taryn climbed up carrying a crate of authorized filter packs on one shoulder and a bruised dark fatigue under both eyes. He set the crate down and rubbed his neck. You alive, then? Apparently. Ruby offered him a hydration pouch from his belt. You were right about kiosk 3. Told you the machine hates stress valves. Taryn drank, then nodded toward the treatment blocks where people moved in open lanes. Never thought I'd see that gate open for my band color. Ruby followed his gaze. Me neither. Taryn's mouth tightened, and he gave Ruby the same loaded look from yesterday, but this time he finished the thought. I started a recording when they pulled you into restricted. Figured if you vanished, somebody should have a timestamp. Sent it to Labor Council and my sister off moon. He shrugged. Didn't need it in the end. Still keeping a copy. Keep it, Ruby said. Evidence ages better than hope. Taryn tipped his chin, then headed for redistribution with his filter packs and no more ceremony. Shao found Ruby 2 hours later in the auxiliary audit chamber, where legal screens floated above a long steel table, and everyone pretended procedure had always intended this outcome. The sanitation officers from the catwalk gave formal statements. Their private recordings confirmed no contamination breach in the vault. The loaded stairs they had traded in the hall paid off as paperwork, and then dissolved into silence. Whatever else they had suspected, they did not pursue it. Dock Authority closed the callback on the unsourced warnings with a terse notation. Source identified as Protected Clinical Intelligence Relay under Commander Physician Seal. No further action. When Ruby looked up from the line item, Shale met his eyes. You asked who protected you, she said quietly, while clerks argued over indemnity clauses at the far end. I did. Your manifest had the shape of a trap around it. Elevator B had thermal sniffers keyed for seizure. I moved your crate alignment through dock optics and pushed the D9 warning through a blind relay. Ruby, let that settle. You could have let protocol eat me. I needed your cargo. She held his gaze a second longer. And I had already decided I disliked that outcome. He breathed out almost a laugh. That's the sweetest threat I've heard all year. By mid-morning, the final tribunal output arrived. Helix 9, having violated Accord contradiction constraints, was decommissioned from autonomous enforcement and reduced to an advisory kernel pending complete rebuild with civilian oversight. Sector Purge Authority was suspended moon-wide by emergency vote. The avian clerk read the ruling aloud with rigid formality and unmistakable relief. One by one, loose ends turned into signatures. Ruby surrendered the forged sanitation stamp plate from his tug's hidden panel. It was logged and destroyed. The old clinic discharge tag with Mateo's name stayed in his pocket. Not evidence, not contraband, just a private vector that had finally reached a destination. Toolkit components were returned sterilized, minus the cannibalized coupler, noted as consumed in life-saving repair. The unknown channel that had once been static and suspicion now had a name in the record and legal cover beside it. The last meeting happened in the triage vault, where the tower still ran on his improvised brace, now wrapped in proper medical shielding and blessed by 3 separate engineering signatures. Staff filled the room and the corridor beyond. Labor nurses, ranked clinicians, sanitation techs, 2 ward elders. Taryn in the back, pretending he had arrived by accident. Shael stood at the central console in formal coat, fur brushed flat, eyes clear for the first time since Ruby had seen her. "Witness record," she said, voice carrying to every corner. Neris Vale Lunar Clinics are entering Integrated Emergency Charter status. Under that charter, I designate Ruby Santos as Chief Systems Medic for Quarantine Response Infrastructure and Open Ward Respiratory Networks. A murmur rolled through the room. Surprise first, then recalculation, then a kind of rough approval from the people who measured worth in solved failures. Ruby blinked. "Commander, I'm a hull mechanic with bad paperwork." "You are a systems builder with excellent paperwork now," she replied. "I have read all of it." Light laughter broke tension. Even the avian clerk looked briefly amused before recording the appointment. Shael stepped closer, lowered her voice so only Ruby caught the last line. "This role binds you to my clinics, my staff, and my liability. High stakes, long hours, political teeth." He looked around at the breathing tower, the open door, the lanes where rank color had begun to blur under shared fatigue, and felt something in him settle that had been braced for years. "Sounds like home with extra paperwork." "Correct." She offered her hand, gloved this time, formal in public. He took it. Her grip was firm, warm, and no longer shaking. Outside the vault windows, Neris Vale's horizon caught first sunlight, across ice plains and antenna fields, and ships kept docking, openly now, medicine moving through legal channels that had been forced wider by proof, stubbornness, and 2 people who had refused to let protocol substitute for care.